analyzed it. What does it mean? He didn't follow his competitors, and he gave his customers what they wanted. So as a result, his first two hits that were big were Men in Black and Independence Day. Together, they grossed $1.8 billion globally. This is 20 years ago. That is an enormous amount of money that they did. So again, what did he do relative to what he wanted? He researched the right information. He got a list of the top 100 grossing films of all time. And then he analyzed it. Of the top 100, the top 10 all had special effects. The top 9 had special effects and creatures. The top 8 had special effects, creatures, and a love story. And that's what he incorporated into the two movies, Men in Black and Independence Day, that he made. He could have made a lot of other movies. He was very, very hot. All the studios wanted him. But he was going to be very deliberate in order to achieve his objective, his goal. He did follow his competitors. The two biggest actors when he broke into films were Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. He didn't follow the movies they were making or the type of celebrities that they were. And finally, he gave the customers what they wanted based on the top grossing films, not the movies he wanted to make. And so after he made enough of the films that really grossed a lot, he came out with others like Ali. They were based on Muhammad Ali. Now, it did okay. It did like about $88 million, but it did only 10% of what the other movies did. So it did all right, but it wasn't nearly the blockbuster the other ones were. So he had a goal, and he knew what he wanted to do, and he got the right information enabled him to do that. So as I said, it works in all kinds of businesses and industries. So let me be a little bit more specific. You want your information to be as current as possible. 2016, sometimes it's not available like that, especially if you have to use government information, which we use very, very rarely, but if that's all that's available, it might be 2014 or even 2013, but you want it to be as current as possible because of how much things change. You want it to be accurate. That means it doesn't come from blogs. Doesn't mean that there aren't any blogs that are valid, but it has to be a source that uses journalistic standards. And so from your trade publications, from business publications, the Wall Street Journal, which is my preferred publication, just to get a sense of everything that's happening. You want it to be from someplace that tells you what's going on, or from talking to people who are really in the know, not just people who spout off information about the industry. So it has to be from good, solid sources. So let me just give you a few examples of what we think we know, but they're myths or not true, or it's changing. You know, the conventional wisdom is that California is a terrible place to do business and everybody is leaving. All the automotive firms are leaving, Jacobs Engineering is leaving, all the firms are leaving California. Well, the reality is that California is #1 in the country, more so than Texas, which we always hear all the jobs going to Texas, for both jobs and firms. California is considered to be a very good place to work. It's not business friendly, but the quality of the people is considered higher than any place else. So a lot of what we think we hear is not always true. We always think that innovation comes from the private sector. In fact, there was a book that was written that has been very highly reviewed that says that the government is a greater source of innovation than private businesses. Now, a lot of the tech companies have taken research and development from the government and applied it, and certainly Apple has done it as well as others. But the private business is not where most of the innovation comes from. They don't have the funds to do it, and the government does. Again, all we hear about are online sales. They certainly are growing, and they account for a significant part, but not nearly as much as we think they are. When we hear about older men working, we always think that they're the poor ones or the ones who are uneducated, when in fact most of them have advanced degrees. So, I mean, I could give you dozens and dozens. I brought a folder full of things that I just ripped out of the paper that are just more of this. This is the world we live in. What we think we know is either not true, it's outdated, it was never true, or it doesn't include what's changing and emerging. So relevant, as I said, signal versus noise, has to be objective, not from the company website. Doesn't mean that what's on the website is not true. It means what's on the website is what they want you to see. And companies often don't update their websites. And think about how often you update your website. But companies, they may not update it, but I know when we work with companies and we look at their website, they say, oh yeah, but don't pay attention to that, or this isn't included. So the website is okay to a limited extent. But the big thing that's missing today is we don't have sufficient information. We live in a headline world, or a headline and a sub-headline, and we don't get down and to find out what's going on. So as a result, a lot of what we think we know, and especially when we're making decisions internally in a company, is misleading because it's insufficient. So remember a few years ago when they had that huge tsunami in Japan at Fukushima, and the nuclear plant melted, and everybody was crazy, oh, gotta get rid of nuclear power, it's the most horrible thing. France and Germany primarily rely on nuclear power. They said we're closing down all of our plants, it's terrible. Everybody wanted the plants in the US and California to be closed down, terrible. A few days later, in, I don't know if it was a Wall Street Journal or the LA Times, they had a chart there, and it showed that the death rates by energy source for coal and oil didn't quite compare to the death rates from nuclear power. Did you hear that? Do you think it's a little misleading? Yes, there were deaths from nuclear energy, and it is dangerous, there's no doubt about it. But let's not fool ourselves about the dangers also from oil and from oil development and from coal mining. And this is very, very typical of what we know and what we don't know. So we need evidence. And the less evidence we have, the more likely we are to make a decision that's not going to deliver the results that we're seeking, because it's not based on the reality of today. And you know, companies will act or react depending on their culture. So like the example I gave with the wrestling equipment, my client chose to act even though the numbers weren't very high. Another company would be much more cautious and wait until the numbers were stronger. Every company has its own way of responding. So you have to know how your client thinks or how your company thinks in terms of, you know, whether they're going to act. And it may even vary depending on what the situation is. But not everybody responds immediately to changes, but you have to know about them. So these are just a few more examples of things that we don't know, or what we know about it isn't true. Like that women are twice as successful as men at raising funds on Kickstarter when it comes to technology. Okay. That they call it the Hispanic paradox. Hispanics live longer than any other demographic group, even at 100 years plus, despite the foods they eat, and despite not getting as much exercise, they live the longest. And the thinking is it's because of the social connections, but it's not terribly sure about that. But they live longer than anybody else. If you are targeting the Hispanic community for whatever reason, might that change either the group that you would target, or maybe the products or services, knowing something like this? Most likely, your company doesn't know that information. So, the thing about competitive intelligence or market intelligence is that it uncovers growth opportunities, and every company wants to grow. Whenever they do surveys of CEOs, that's the number one thing. CEOs want to grow their companies. So let me give you an example of how you find growth opportunities even when you're not looking for them. Semco was a very, very successful company that made cooling towers, water cooling towers for very large commercial buildings. That's all they did. They made the cooling towers. And they had a very good relationship with their clients. They always kept in touch with them. And the clients were constantly complaining about the maintenance. They said that, you know, these companies that do the maintenance on it, they don't do a good enough job, or they don't do it often enough, or they miss things, and they were constantly hearing about complaints for many, many years. So finally they decided, well, you know, we want to keep our customers happy, and even though that's not our business, let's see if we can do something about it. So they set up a separate business to maintain the cooling towers that they manufactured and installed. This was not their core business. Within 5 years, that maintenance business was valued at $30 million. They weren't looking to go into this industry, but they heard what their customers were saying. They paid attention to them. This one is an interesting example. This is, we had a client who made telephones for prisons. And there are all kinds of specs, and when you're in a prison, they have to be able to monitor the phone and listen for certain words, and there are just all different kinds of things, different software has to go into it. Well, in the prison system, it's segmented into 3 categories. Prisons are divided according to the number of beds, so it's under 250 beds, 250 to 500 beds, and over 500 beds. Well, our clients, most of their customers were in the lowest tier, under 250 beds. They wanted to move to the middle tier, or selling 250 to 500. As you know, when you sell to larger companies, it's not that much more work, but it's much more, you know, revenues and profits are often better. They identified 13 prisons they wanted to sell to. And so our job was to find out as much as we could about the purchasing process for each of those 13 prisons. And it was all over the place. We found out when the contracts were up, who they had the contracts with, what they liked about their current supplier, what they didn't like, what they want to change, what the money was used for. Some prisons use it internally to set up libraries, or for training, or for gym equipment. In other cities, the monies that the prisons gain from the phones is used for parks or things in the community. It has nothing to do with the prison. Anyhow, getting all this information for the 13 prisons, which we gave them, they gave it to their salespeople, enabled the salespeople to customize their conversations or sales pitches when they went to speak to the prisons. As a result of this, they were able to gain half of these 13 prisons as new clients. And the bonus was something totally unexpected.